So, in this critique, we are looking at a transcript exploring the argument that modern leftist and Marxist ideologies deliberately undermine the traditional nuclear family to foster reliance on the state.
Right. It's a really ambitious piece.
It is, yeah. And we are going to dive straight into the feedback right now to see how we can, strengthen this material and maximize its impact.
Yeah, because we have some incredibly rich source material to work. There's just a lot of raw energy in this draft.
Definitely. But, well, a tighter structural through line is needed to tether the disparate examples back to the central thesis regarding the nuclear family and state reliance.
Exactly, because the weakness right now is that the material jumps, rapidly across vastly different topics.
Yeah, it really does.
We start with a wholesome McDonald's Japan advertisement being labeled fascist online, which is a great hook. But then, suddenly we are into marital dynamics, quoting Jordan Peterson.
Right.
And from there, it pivots to wealth envy and a critique of commentator Hassan Piker's expensive wardrobe. And then it finally lands on Australian building regulations regarding housing stumps.
And historical Canadian sod houses, yeah.
Right. It's just that rapid topic hopping dilutes the core argument about the family unit. The focus feels so fragmented, which makes it incredibly hard for the audience to follow the overarching premise.
Is there a risk that, by tackling bureaucratic building codes, celebrity wardrobes, and Marxist theory in the exact same breath, the listener might entirely forget the initial, very compelling hook about the McDonald's ad and the family?
Oh, absolutely. That is the exact risk. You have all these vibrant, passionate anecdotes, but the reader is getting whiplash trying to figure out how a wealthy political commentator's cert relates to residential building codes in Victoria, Australia.
Yeah, it's a big leap.
And when the reader has to guess what the connecting thread is, well, they usually just stop reading.
Right. But hold on, I kind of want to push back on that just a bit.
Okay, sure.
Because right now the script reads like a scattered mosaic, but it needs to be focused into a laser beam, right? But if we aggressively cut or rework these tangents, don't we lose the vibrant energy of the piece?
I don't think it's about losing the flavor. It's about, concentrating. The suggestion here is to reorganize the narrative to explicitly frame every single anecdote as a direct symptom of the state attempting to replace or inhibit the family unit, aggressively cutting or reworking tangents that do not serve this specific framing.
Okay, so it's more about doing the cognitive heavy lifting for the reader.
Exactly. Let's look at some concrete examples for improvement. Instead of focusing on the cost of Hassan Piker's clothes as a standalone grievance about hypocrisy, frame the wealth discussion purely around how the state weaponizes envy to break community bonds and family inheritance.
Oh, I see. So it's not just, complaining about a rich guy dressing expensively.
No, exactly. Because the mechanism is clear, right? If the state can promote class envy to legitimize the taxation of generational wealth, they prevent the family from securing its own future, making them dependent on the government.
Right, which ties perfectly back to the thesis. What about the Australian housing regulations? Because that part just felt so untethered to me.
Yeah, so when discussing the housing regulations, like the inability to build homes on stumps or even those historical Canadian sod houses, explicitly tie this to the delayed formation of nuclear families.
Okay, so show exactly how state bureaucracy directly blocks young couples from building homes and starting families, rather than just complaining about building codes in a vacuum.
Yes, connect those dots. Explain that when bureaucracy outlaws affordable building methods, it prices young adults out. No home means delayed marriage, fewer children, and eventually a population forced to rely on state pensions rather than their own kids for elder care.
Wow. Yeah, that is a huge shift. It turns a localized frustration into a massive structural argument.
Exactly. It makes the piece a scalpel instead of a Swiss Army knife.
I love that. Okay, so once the structure is tightened around that central thesis of state versus family, anticipating and preemptively addressing opposing definitions of key political terms will significantly fortify the argument against immediate dismissal by critics.
This is such an important point, because the weakness here is that the transcript freely labels opponents as fascist and Marxists completely interchangeable.
Right, which, I get where the author is coming from. It rightfully criticizes the extreme left for misusing the word fascist to describe a normal nuclear family.
Right, in the McDonald's ad.
Yeah, but it doesn't robustly defend its own use of these terms against the obvious historical counterargument that communism and fascism are traditionally opposed ideologies.
It really doesn't, and that causes major cognitive friction. If a reader sees Marxism and fascism conflated without any caveat, they stop engaging with the thesis about the family, and they just start arguing with the author in their head about 20th century history.
Yeah, because the author clearly has a deep, practical understanding of economics and construction codes. But, if the material criticizes the left for twisting the meaning of fascism to just mean anything they don't like, does the author risk falling into that exact same semantic trap at the end of the script?
They absolutely do. And how can they avoid this? Well, the suggestion is to integrate a brief, preemptive acknowledgement of the traditional distinctions between these ideologies before demonstrating how they overlap in their authoritarian outcomes regarding the family unit.
Okay, so you sort of show the reader that you know the rules before you break them.
Exactly. A concrete example for improvement would be to add a clarifying sentence early on, such as, while historically Marxism and fascism clashed over economics, their modern applications unite in authoritarianism, specifically in how they both demand total allegiance to the state over the family.
Oh, that's really clean. It completely disarms that history buff who's just waiting to yell about economic models.
Right. Or, here's an alternative concrete example. Just temporarily drop the label fascist when describing the left and exclusively use the term authoritarian collectivism.
Oh, I like that. Authoritarian collectivism.
Yeah, because this avoids semantic debates entirely and keeps the listener focused on the actual critique of state overreach and the preservation of personal freedom.
It describes the mechanism rather than the historical aesthetic. That is a really smart pivot.
Precision is just so crucial when you're making arguments this bold.
So true. All right, so having secured the definitions and the structural focus, recalibrating the delivery of the sociological claims about marital dynamics will prevent these points from reading as unsupported tangents and instead make them vital pillars of the broader argument.
Yeah, this brings us to the tone and style, which gets a bit tricky here.
It does. Because the weakness is that the section theorizing about women's voting habits, hidden primal desires for dominance, and indirect communication, like referencing Jordan Peterson and various YouTubers, it just feels wildly out of step with the rest of the political and economic focus.
It really does. It risks coming across as a generalized battle of the sexes grievance, rather than a substantiated point about why the state wants to dismantle the family.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
Appealing to biological realities is a strong rhetorical move, right? Like, could leaning so heavily on an interpersonal battle of the sexes distract the listener from the far more compelling argument about the state attempting to replace the family as the ultimate financial and emotional provider?
Yes, it 100% distracts. When you invoke hidden primal desires for dominance, you instantly move the reader out of a logical mindset and into a defensive one. They completely forget about the state's economic reliance.
Right, they just start arguing about modern dating in their heads.
Exact. So the suggestion is to ground the claims about gender and marriage explicitly in economic or sociological data regarding state dependence, rather than relying on philosophical theories about primal dominance.
What are some concrete examples of how to do that?
Well, rather than stating women secretly want a stronger male to dominate them, cite specific statistics showing how married, dual-income households rely less on state subsidies, thereby threatening the collectivist model.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that frames marriage as an economic fortress instead of like a dominance hierarchy.
Exactly. It triggers their logic, not their emotion. Or, if keeping the Jordan Peterson reference, explicitly connect the concept of relying on a strong partner to the earlier excellent point about looking after aging parents without a state pension.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, keep the focus entirely on economics, community care, and autonomy.
That makes so much sense. It takes a controversial psychological claim and just anchors it entirely to the material reality of the family unit.
Right, it makes the argument almost bulletproof.
All right, well, to quickly summarize our 3 main areas of feedback today. First, tightening the structural through line so that every anecdote from Hassan Piker to Australian housing stumps directly connects to the thesis of state reliance.
Yep, and second, preemptively addressing semantic counterarguments regarding the definitions of fascism and Marxism.
Right, to avoid that hypocrisy trap. And third, grounding the psychological claims about marriage and gender in economic reality rather than generalized philosophy.
Exactly. So the actionable summary for the listener is reframe your tangents, clarify your political definitions to avoid hypocrisy, and pivot the gender dynamics discussion to focus purely on state reliance.
Perfect. We invite the listener to apply these actionable suggestions, revise their material, and submit their work back in for another round of feedback. We can't wait to see how this piece evolves.